Here are 5 bold fantasy football predictions for week 6 of the NFL season. Let's get right into it. Tetairoa McMillan finally scores his first NFL touchdown this week. I know this is at least the second time, maybe the third time we've included McMillan in this video already this season, but that just means we're still waiting on the true fantasy breakout to fully happen, to match up with what we're seeing on the field every single week. He's absolutely looked the part so far. The fantasy production hasn't necessarily followed suit. He's, of course, yet to score a touchdown. He's wide receiver 25 on the year, just under 12 fantasy points per game in full PPR. But the underlying stats continue to be encouraging. 25% team target share. That's 14th in the NFL. It's higher than Nico Collins, higher than Brian Thomas, even Emeka Egbuka. He's 7th in the NFL in total targets with 43, at least 8 targets in all 5 games so far, averaging almost 15 yards per reception on the year. And part of the issue is he's only caught 24 of those 43 targets from Bryce Young. But the bottom line is the opportunities continue to be there. And he now gets to face at home the most wide receiver friendly defense in the NFL in the Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys dead last in production allowed to receivers this season. They're giving up 44.9 PPR points to wide receivers on the year. They've given up the most yards, the highest yards per target by a mile, the highest catch rate. They've even allowed an NFL high 10 touchdowns to the wide receiver position. At long last, we will say this is the week Tetairoa McMillan scores his first NFL touchdown, gives you at least 25 fantasy points in what should be a sneaky fun back and forth game between Carolina and Dallas. Bold prediction number 2, Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers finishes as the tight end 1 this week with a monster game against Cincinnati. Kraft and Jake Ferguson, to me, are the big 2 at tight end this week. Both of them draw incredibly friendly matchups. Ferguson gets the Panthers, Kraft gets the Bengals. Defending tight ends was a major issue for both of those teams last year, specifically Cincinnati. They were dead last in fantasy points allowed to tight ends in 2024. Through 5 weeks, they are dead last in fantasy points allowed to tight ends in 2025 at nearly 19 fantasy points per game. We just saw Sam Laporta go for 5 for 92 in a score last week for the Lions. You look at Tucker Kraft, he's coming out of a bye, so he's only played 4 games. He was banged up for one of those. He has only one true splash game on the year. That was week 2 against Washington, 6 for 124 and a touchdown. He nearly scored twice in that 40-40 tie against Dallas, was tackled at the 1 millimeter line on 2 separate plays. For the second straight season, he leads all tight ends in yards after contact. 157 of his 225 yards on the season have come after contact. He's averaging 9.8 yak yards per reception, 5 red zone targets through 4 games. Even with the bye, that's still 3rd in the NFL behind the big 2, Theo Johnson and Hunter Henry. Picking and choosing the Packers wide receivers every week, especially with Christian Watson coming back in the next week or 2, it's going to be a dicey proposition, but Kraft is the guy who we know is going to be involved week to week in that Green Bay passing game. Should be a monster matchup for him this week against Cincinnati. We'll say Tucker Kraft, like McMillan, goes for 25 plus fantasy points, including not 1, but 2 touchdowns in a home bounce back win for the Green Bay Packers. Bold prediction number 3, JaCory Croskey-Merritt, Bill, runs wild on the Chicago Bears, finishes as a top 5 running back on the week. So far, if you bought in on the preseason hype on Croskey-Merritt, it's been mostly frustrating experience. Prior to week 5, he hadn't scored more than 14.2 fantasy points in any game, had a complete dud mixed in there, a 1.2 fantasy point performance in week 2, finally exploded last week in a matchup that I wouldn't have necessarily seen coming against the LA Chargers. 27 fantasy points, 16 touches, 14 for 111 and 2 scores on the ground and 2 catches for 39 yards. In terms of the snap share, he was still on the field for only 48% of the Commanders' offensive snaps, but that was still by far a season high. And for the first time all year, he was getting work on the first 2 drives of the game. Maybe the Commanders pull out the rug on us again, who knows, but that Chargers game to me was a showcase of what Croskey-Merritt is really capable of. He was jumping off the screen in the second half as Washington ran away with that game. Clearly the most explosive of the 3 running backs in Washington right now. Commanders now get the late home game on Monday night. They get the Chicago Bears coming to town. Yeah, Bears are off a bye. They beat the Raiders barely, by the way, before that. But this defense is one that we absolutely want to target for fantasy, especially for running backs. Bears are giving up 3rd most fantasy points to running backs this season, almost 31 per game. Dead last in the NFL in yards per carry allowed, over 6 yards per attempt. They've already given up 19 rushes of at least 10 yards in only 4 games. We'll say JaCory Croskey-Merritt goes for 130 plus yards, at least 1 touchdown on Monday night. Bold prediction number 4 for week 6 of the NFL season. For the 5th consecutive week, you look back and you wish you would have left Derrick Henry on your bench. Oh man, I have a lot of Derrick Henry shares in my portfolio this season, and I am not happy about it. So last week in this video, we went out on a limb. We said the Ravens would lean heavily on Derrick Henry, try to pound that ground game, keep him in it against Houston. Henry would have a huge day on volume. Could not have been more wrong. Could not have been more wrong. I mean, the volume was there to some degree, but another complete disaster for the Baltimore Ravens. Fell behind early, never really recovered. Henry ended up essentially with a fourth consecutive dud. He did carry it 15 times, gained only 33 yards on those 15 carries, found the end zone for Baltimore's only touchdown. But rostering Derrick Henry right now just continues to be an extremely depressive reality. Week 1. Go back to that game against Buffalo. 18 carries, 169 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 5 runs of 10-plus yards. He gave you 29.2 fantasy points. Would have been over 30 had it not been for the fumble. Weeks 2 through 5, this is a 4-game sample. 46 carries, 148 total yards, 1 touchdown, 3 runs that have gone for 10-plus yards. He's given you 30.1 total fantasy points in that span. If we're being honest, the Ravens might be in position to get smacked around again this week by the LA Rams. I think this is an even worse matchup on paper than what we saw last week against Houston. Rams are coming off a huge letdown game on Thursday night. They got extra rest heading into this. Look, at the end of the day, I know it's Derrick Henry. You might have spent the 8th or 9th overall pick on him in your draft. You're still terrified not to start him in any given week. I know I'll still be rolling him out there in a couple of leagues this weekend, but I think at the end of week 6, we're going to look back once again. The Ravens are going to get smacked at home once again. And we will say for the 5th consecutive week, Derrick Henry is unable to top 50 yards on the ground as this worst case scenario start to the season continues. For our 5th and final bold prediction for NFL week 6, we'll go with a little more of an optimistic tone here. Bijan Robinson coming out of the bye leads the Falcons to a straight up win at home over the Buffalo Bills. So again, Falcons coming off a bye. They've had 2 full weeks to prepare for this game. Buffalo making the trip down to Atlanta. They lost at home Sunday night, the latest in a string of just kind of semi-sleepwalking games for the Buffalo Bills. Yeah, they beat Miami. Yeah, they beat New Orleans. Neither of those wins were overly convincing. Failed to cover both of those games. Still, the Bills are the much better team. I'll happily admit that. They're probably going to be the 1 seed in the AFC, thanks in large part to that remaining schedule. But we're yet to see really a complete 2-way effort from the Bills this season. New England was able to basically completely shut down the Bills' running game on Sunday night. That's really the first time all year that's happened. And Atlanta's been much improved on the defensive side. Number 1 fantasy defense against running backs on the year, giving up just 15.2 fantasy points per game to the running back position. So I'm not sure this is going to be a great spot necessarily for James Cook. Meanwhile, the Buffalo defense has some major holes. They struggled against Stephon Diggs on Sunday night. They've had issues holding up against the run this season. Bills are tied with Miami right now in terms of giving up the most explosive running plays in the NFL with 27 allowed. That's over 5 per game where teams are ripping off 20-plus yard runs. Oh, I think it's 10-plus yard runs. I'm going to restart that part. Meanwhile, the Buffalo defense not playing that well, has some major holes, really struggled against Stephon Diggs on Sunday night. They've had issues all year holding up against the run. Buffalo's tied with Miami right now in terms of giving up the most explosive runs. We're talking 10-plus yards in the NFL, 27 already this season. That's over 5 per game. So coming out of the bye, I think the Falcons pick up where they left off. Impressive win over Washington in week 4. We'll say Bijan Robinson racks up 150-plus scrimmage yards. Tyler Algier works in as the battering ram around the goal line. The Falcons send the Buffalo Bills to their 2nd straight loss. And by the way, Bijan Robinson's rushing plus receiving yards number right now sitting at 108.5. I'll tell you this, the RotoWire picks tool, which you can find over at rotowire.com, all over the more on that number if you're looking for a prop this weekend.